Hello again, and welcome once more to Denton's Tales, and part two of the Valkyrie. Now, when we left them at the end of part one, I mentioned a popular myth about the Valkyrie, that they were simply the bearers of dead warriors skywards to Osgard, a sort of post-battle transport service. No, they were not. Very far from it, in fact, though they are regarded as the choosers of the slain and the free transport to places skywards afterwards, as their name implies, the choosers of the warriors slain in battle. They didn't just ride around battlefields making and collecting dead bodies. Oh, no. There was much, much more to their job description than just the scooping up of dead guys from time to time and riding off with them into the sky, though that is frequently overlooked. But it is a very important point. They are nearly always seen in their warrior transporting role, but the duties of these women was twofold. Firstly, yes, as the armed choosers and gatherers of those slain in battle, and bearing them skywards to Osgard. But once they got them there, once they got them there, then changing their character completely, and I'm sure discarding their armour and helmets for a more, socially acceptable attire, becoming waitresses and bar staff. Yes, waitresses and bar staff, attending those same recently deceased warriors, the Einherjar, or the once fighters as they were called, as they feasted along with the gods, bringing them a never-ending supply of meat from the udder of a heavenly goat named Hadron, and meat from an everlasting boar, this amazing creature cooked and eaten by night and then revived the next day to be cooked and eaten all over again the following night, and so on and so on. In one poem, the VALKYRJUR are actually mentioned as being told to prepare for the arrival of guests in Valhall, to clean the benches, and to be ready to serve wine to them. Now, when you think about it, that aspect of the Valkyrie is actually their primary function. Yes, their primary function. Waitresses, not armed warriors riding forth in search of mangled bodies strewn across battlefields. No, not gathering dead warriors, but taking care of them in Valhall. See, warriors were not being killed on a daily basis, even in Viking times. Battles were not raging across Scandinavia from dawn to dusk every day. Weeks could go by without any man being killed with a sword in his hand anywhere. Yet the once fighters, they had requirements 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So most of the time, the Valkyrie would not have been sitting around playing board games or polishing their spears as they waited for Odin's call to arms, but would have acted in their waitress or barmaid roles, as well as, let me see, how shall I put this delicately? It's so easy to offend someone somewhere these days. Providing, shall we say, more friendly services. Yes, friendly services. You know what I mean. Yes, that. Yeah. It is possible also that when they did ride forth on body collecting duty, they did not actually ride on horses. Oh, yes. But I shall come to that a bit later, so hang on. Valhall, was a pretty lively place. Very far from the Christian vision of the afterlife, as a place up among the nice fluffy little white clouds where everything is peaceful and people twang harps and they go around with little golden rings floating over their heads. How lovely. And how incredibly boring. Anyway, in Valhall, the deceased warriors, they enjoyed themselves by fighting and killing one another all day, except because they couldn't actually die, seeing as they were already dead, which actually seems to rather a good way to fight a war. I mean, it doesn't matter. Your arm gets cut off, you lose a leg, you spill out your guts all over the floor, or somebody buries an axe in your skull, no problem. 5 minutes later, you're good as new again, and you just go on fighting like nothing had happened. I don't think I'd mind fighting a war on those terms. After slaughtering each other numerous times all day, then they would go and feast with Odin all night, with the VALKYRJUR, of course, attending to them as table servants, then doing it all over again the following day, and so on, and so on, and so on, until the eventual end of the world, or Ragnarok. That doesn't sound so bad. Killing things indefinitely, that could be fun. An alcohol-producing goat, an immortal joint of roast meat, and a bevy of beautiful warrior women / waitresses to bring it to you. And what more could you want? I don't think I'd mind doing that. I suppose, yes. I suppose it might get a bit boring, though, somewhat repetitive, perhaps after a few centuries at least, though probably still preferable to sitting down chatting to hell. At least if one was a ferocious Viking warrior who wanted lots of dead guy action stuff. Not that hell wouldn't have had lots of fascinating things to talk about. I mean, for a start, not everyone has a giant snake and a monstrous wolf for brothers. Nor was the Norse hell a place of simple punishment. Oh, God, no, it wasn't. The Christians saw hell, spelt with two L's, as a realm of everlasting fire and brimstone, screaming, tormented souls being prodded by laughing demons with pitchforks. Burn, burn. No. The Norse hell, spelt with one L, the same as the goddess who ruled it, was mostly just a place where the dead went who didn't die in battle. Die with a sword in your hand and whoosh over a Valkyrie horse, or possibly a wolf, and straight up to Asgard. Special delivery. But if you die old and toothless in bed, or you snuff it during a plague, or get trampled by a runaway horse, well, sorry about that. Down you go to hell. And there you sit around, well, twiddling your thumbs, or, well, probably, in fact, just doing many of the things you did in life, actually. Eating, sleeping, having sex, or just scratching your arse till Ragnarok comes along. Now, then it gets pretty lively down there and exciting, since you're all going to pour out to join in the great battle. Or, well, the more energetic ones, at least. Now, you might ask, was Sessrumnir, the hall of the goddess Freyja, the same as Valhall? Did the warriors fight and feast there? Was there an everlasting joint of roast meat and a sort of pub on 4 legs, mead-producing goat? And did the Valkyrie divide their entertaining and waitress duties between the two halls? Well, clearly Sessrumnir was as large and probably just as splendid as Valhall, since it contained the same number of once-fighters, each hall having half of the total number. But as to the catering and the entertainment side of it, well, we really have no idea. That isn't mentioned. Just that Freyja takes half of the warriors to her hall. Now, we must assume, I suppose, it would be much the same. After all, it would be rather unfair if half the dead warriors got to feast and fight, eat roast boar, and get pissed out of their mind on divine mead and frolic with the Valkyrie, while the other half just went picking flowers in Folkvanger and doing their own catering. Yes. I, for one, would be rather indignant had I been a warrior and Eric and I had died together, weapons in our hands, and he was over in Valhall, drunk out of his mind and full of boar meat, with a couple of Valkyrie, well, sitting on his knee, and I was having a sandwich while making flower arrangements. No, I don't think that would work. So we must assume the two halls for the once fighters were much the same, or the complaints department in Sessrumnir must have been really busy. Some references in the old writings suggest that all the dead warriors among them went to hell, at least to begin with, since that was the realm of the dead, and Odin had given the goddess the task of caring for all the dead. Warriors are mentioned by Saxo as fighting in hell, just as they were supposed to do in Valhall, and special shoes called hell shoes are also mentioned, fitted onto the feet of dead warriors so they could walk on to Valhall after passing through hell. Though why they would need special footwear, well, that isn't really stated. They just did. One name for the wall that surrounded hell was the Valkyrjur, meaning the wall of the warriors slain in battle. And that does suggest that the warriors did indeed go there, albeit perhaps only temporarily. There is a suggestion that early in Norse belief, Valhall was actually in hell itself, being perhaps moved skywards to Asgard later as Norse belief changed, as aspects of religion can do over centuries. Or later, when the sagas were being written down, to blend in more with the Christian concept of lovely heaven up there and flaming hell down there. That is possible. But either way, the Valkyrie could still have taken the warriors to Valhall, wherever it happened to be. And in one poem, they are mentioned as being ready to ride to the earth, suggesting that they did indeed come down from somewhere. Also, it's worth noting that Valkyrjur was not seen as floating somewhere high up in the sky among the clouds, as was the image of the Christian heaven, a place disembodied completely from the earth, but rather as simply a high place, a mountain top or a high mountain plateau, for example. It was not seen as a sort of island floating in the sky, floating somewhere up there. It is up only in the sense that it's higher than other places. Its name actually means the enclosure of the Asir, the enclosure of the gods. And clearly it wasn't separated from the earth, since to begin with, a builder started constructing a wall around it for the gods to keep out the giants. Though it transpired later he was actually a giant himself, and he was involved with trickery, with the connivance of Loki. Well, naturally, who else? But regardless of where Valkyrjur actually was, the account of the Valkyrie bringing the warriors skywards, that comes to us from Snorri. So he could have invented that to make it more, well, I don't know, more palatable to his Christian readers, the heaven up there and hell down below concept. Perhaps even a subtle likening of the Valkyrie to angels, both bringing the deserving dead to their heavenly reward, though they are frequently mentioned in many Old Norse poems and stories predating Snorri as being on the battlefield and choosing who lived and died. So we know that part of it is correct. It's just the going up part that has been questioned, because it seems to suggest a Christian rather than a pagan viewpoint. Pagans never saw the up and down connections with the afterlife in the way Christians did. Personally, I don't think Snorri invented it. I mean, think about it. Why would he? It didn't fit the Christian viewpoint. There was no special place in the Christian heaven for warriors. Good, pious people, yes, especially those very good and pious people who gave most liberally to the church. Gold or silver donated to the church got you a lovely front row seat in heaven. So had Snorri wanted to embellish the tale, shall we say, for Christians, surely he would have had the Valkyrie riding aloft with the good, the saintly people, those who had led blameless lives and given plenty of money to the church, not warriors. There was no logical reason for him to move dead warriors upwards. That didn't fit any Christian thinking, so I am inclined to think that he was simply following the pagan traditions. As to the Valkyrie riding down, up, sideways, or anywhere else, there's a possibility that they did not always ride horses. And when horses are mentioned in the sagas, it is possible that a Valkyrie horse was sometimes actually a kenning. A kenning is the traditional Norse sort of poetic circumlocution, you might say, but what might be seen as a euphemism, and that in the context of a Valkyrie horse, it stood for a wolf. And one rather good bit of evidence for that is the famous Rockstone. Now, that is a large carved runestone in Sweden, dating from the early 9th century. It's 8 feet in height and it weighs over 5 tons. And one passage on it, referring to the aftermath of a battle, and officially regarded as a kenning, says, "I say this the 12th, where the horse of Gunnar sees fodder on the battlefield, where 20 kings lie." Now, dead bodies hardly seem the sort of fodder your average horse would be, overjoyed to be fed on, not being carnivores after all. But a wolf would be thrilled to be surrounded by lovely, tasty, mangled bodies. And this passage is seen as being a kenning for wolf. In a poem from the Poetic Edda, there is also another kenning mention of a Valkyrie horse, feasting on the fodder of ravens. Or, in other words, the very unhorse-like eating of dead bodies. So, should we see the Valkyrie as not riding upon horses, as the popular view is, but rather mounted upon giant wolves? That is very likely the case, though one can't be certain that every mention of a horse was actually a kenning, but it is quite possible. So there's a little new thought to think about. Now, the Valkyrie may be beautiful women, but beauty isn't always a good indicator of personality, nor does it imply sweetness and charm, and they were not always seen as particularly charming when going about their death-dealing and corpse-collecting duties, though I'm sure they niced up quite a bit when they exchanged their spears and helmets for horns of mead or wine and trenchers of roast boar. For example, in the Volsunga saga, looking at a Valkyrie was described as staring into a flame. or towards the end of Noel's saga, where a truly charming image of them in their who dies, who lives role is presented, and doing it in a rather unusual way. This tells of a man in Caithness named Durrett, who, just before the Battle of Clontarf, which took place in Ireland just outside Dublin, or as Dublin was known back then, on Good Friday in the year 1014 AD, when he sees a group of 12 women go into a stone hut. Now he's curious as to what they're up to, so he sneaks over and he looks through a chink in the wall to see what they are doing. It's a fair bet he rather regretted doing that, at least if he'd just eaten dinner. Inside, the women turn out to be, yes, you guessed it, Valkyrie, and they sing a cheerful little poem as he watches, trying to memorize it and probably trying not to vomit, while they set up a loom. Now why, I hear you ask, would setting up a loom, spinning something, be a bit stomach-churning? Well, the loom is clearly a custom-made Valkyrie issue. A marvellous piece of equipment. There's no record of a more impressive bit of equipment in history. It's made from dead men's body parts. Yes, assorted bits of dead men, presumably collected previously on a battlefield somewhere. And on this quite lovely piece of machinery, they begin weaving the fate of the warriors prior to the coming battle, deciding fate much as the Norns are supposed to have done, though the Norns didn't actually spin or weave it. Contrary to popular belief, they carved men's fate on wooden sticks. As time went on, the Valkyrie seemed to get actually closer to the Norns in some ways, as in this case, where they are actually deciding fate, not on the battlefield. And one of the three named Norns was actually, according to Snorri, a Valkyrie herself, the youngest of the three, in fact, schooled. In one quoted poem, it says, "Valkyrie come from far and wide, schooled, held a shield." And in the Prose Edda, Snorri tells us, "These are called Valkyrie. Them Odin sends to every battle. They determine men's fairness, and they award victory. Gudur and Rota, and the youngest Norn, she who is called Skuld, ride ever to take the slain and decide fights." However, to get back to the dozen women in the stone hut at Caithness who are behaving in a decidedly un-Valkyrie manner, they are greatly enjoying themselves. Oh, having a whale of a time, a rare old time apparently, gleefully weaving away, deciding the destiny of the warriors on their deceased man-bits loom, using severed heads as weights, intestines for the warp and weft, and a sword for the shuttle, blood-covered spears for spindles, and arrows for reels. Lovely combination. And they are singing happily to themselves a cheerful little ditty that went as follows. How awful it is to be without, as blood-red wrack races overhead. Is the welkin gory with warriors' blood, as we Valkyrie war songs chanted? Charming. When they've finished, they tear the resulting cloth or thing or whatever you want to call the undoubtedly rather messy result of their efforts into 12 pieces, each woman taking one and saying, "Start we swiftly with steeds unsaddled, heads to battle with brandished sword," before mounting their horses or wolves and riding off, 6 going north, the other 6 going south, presumably to collect the dead warriors that they've just chosen as deserving a right to Valhall. A quite delightful little scene, to be sure. A perfect bedtime story for very young and impressionable children. Ones you don't like very much. But you know, what a bunch of Valkyrie were doing in Caithness, singing and weaving about a battle in Ireland, since Caithness is in Scotland, and just about the furthest point in Scotland you can actually get from Ireland without falling off into the North Sea, I really don't know. You know, if they just sat on the Hill of Howth in Dublin Bay, Clontarf would have been right there just below them, a short distance away. But no, they go off to Scotland. And they didn't stop there either, since a similar event was said to have occurred in the even more distant Faroe Islands, way out in the North Atlantic. But you know, here's the thing. Half of them went north, half of them went south. But Clontarf is southwest from Scotland in another country. So it would seem the dead warriors would be waiting rather a long time for their pickup to arrive, since all the Valkyrie went in the wrong direction. You know, they went that way to the Faroe Islands, where, they were unlikely to find any victims of the Battle of Clontarf, and they went that way, perhaps to England, where again there were hardly any dead combatants from Clontarf lying around, when they should have gone that way, to where they might actually find some dead guys ready for Valhalla, since that was where the battle actually was. I must say the loom was impressive. Oh yes, that had style. That loom had style. But a good map to go with it might have been helpful. But let's just look at some Valkyria who did actually know where they were going. In one Old Norse poem in the Poetic Edda, the hero of the tale, Helgi, sits surveying the bodies strewn across a battlefield when Valkyria appeared, riding across the sky. Then light shone from Logafell, and from that radiance there came bolts of lightning. Wearing helmets came the Valkyria. Their burnies were drenched in blood, and rays shone from their spears. That's stirring stuff, you can't beat that. Later on in the poem, they return, this time to protect him during the battle, after which they ride off, all save one, named Sigrun. Helmeted Valkyria came down from the sky. The noise of spears grew loud. They protected the prince. Then, said Sigrun, the wound-giving Valkyria flew. The troll woman's mount was feasting on the fodder of ravens. The latter is the kenning I mentioned earlier. Her mount, a wolf, was having the bodies of the slain for lunch. Very, very tasty, I'm sure, and fresh. Fresh, of course. Probably still warm, actually. No need to bring food for your trusty wolf steed. There was plenty of, tasty stuff lying around on the battlefield. Just get to it before the crows and the ravens got there. As a final note, just as thunder and lightning are associated with Thor using his famous hammer, Mjolnir, not that he was ever actually mentioned anywhere in the sagas as having anything whatsoever to do with thunder, so too the Valkyria, not to be outdone by the supposed thunder god, were thought to produce a spectacular effect in the heavens themselves. The beautiful red and green flickering curtains of light seen in the sky at northern latitudes, the North Light to the Norse, which we know as the Aurora Borealis, being produced by reflections from their armour and their shields as they rode through the air to carry out the commands of Odin. Now that was recorded in a book called The King's Mirror, which is a Norwegian educational text written about around 1230 AD. And the Valkyria tale is based on stories that were brought to Norway from Greenland, like most of what we know about Norse mythology, a verbal tale written down centuries afterwards by Christians. Interestingly enough, The King's Mirror was actually compiled as a father and son dialogue, intended as part of the education of a young man called Magnus, the son of King Håkon Håkonsson, the son asking his father questions on all manner of subjects such as trade, morality, military tactics and strategies and the like, and his father answering them. That concludes this little talk on the subject of the Valkyria. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time I shall say farewell, goodbye for now.